room full of creative folks is hands down my favorite audience to speak to, and you guys are pretty much the coolest creative folks I can think of. I have bought some items off of Etsy, let me tell you. More than a few. I am your target audience. And you are mine. So this is already a match made in heaven. Thank you for having me today. Hi, I'm Fay. I am an artist, mostly in the form of writing very sad songs, which somehow in turn makes me very happy. I am a new author of a book you now own called New Order, a Decluttering Handbook for Creative Folks and everyone else. And I am a decluttering pro. And I want to start by telling you a little bit about where the mission of my decluttering business, also called New Order, is now versus where it was when I started in 2006. And in order to tell you that story, I'm going to back up even further and tell you where I started. So come with me, if you will, on a journey back to the 1990s to a young girl's bedroom that looked like this. Would you trust this person to organize your life? Surprise! Many of my organizing colleagues say, yeah, I was just always organized, everything was just always in its place. Not me. I was organized only about snacks. I always knew where my snacks were. That was what was important to me. Clearly not my desk area and where I got work done. Let me show you another picture. Here was my bed. That's right. I guess I just threw those clothes on the floor when I needed to sleep. I'm not sure how that worked. There's some trash by the bedside table for good measure. And my personal favorite is the dresser area, where some more trash, some more piles, more toiletries than a young girl ever needs, but okay. And there's no handle on that top right drawer. And I can remember clearly doing that thing every morning where you would just like flick up the drawer and it would slowly come out. I never thought about fixing it. And make no mistake, I was not a neglected child. My mom was very upset about this situation and actually took these photos to blackmail me in some way in the future. I'm not sure what her plan was. Well, joke's on you, Mom, because I just wrote a book about decluttering. So the artistic rendering, if you will, of this period of my life might look something like this. No choices made, no patterns here, disorder, chaos. Now, somehow, by the time I had reached my mid-20s, I had turned and done a total 180 and become this hardcore, organized perfectionist. And that part of my life looked more like this. Everything in its place, everything done right. I couldn't take a yoga class unless my yoga mat lined up perfectly with the floorboards. Yeah. And I was proud of being a perfectionist. I truly thought that's how you do life right. And I opened my decluttering business somewhat based on this idea that organization and perfectionism go together. Maybe you also grew up with a similar belief system, being type A, maybe a little OCD, organized, perfectionism, all went together, right? But about 5 years into my business, I started to get exhausted, and I was unhappy. I was staying up until 4 in the morning, returning emails that absolutely could have been returned the next day, or the next week, or never. I would leave clients' houses, and I would feel like a failure if we hadn't gotten to every single thing that we had on the list for our decluttering projects. So I started to do some digging. I went on a bit of a spiritual journey, and I started to discover that my perfectionism was due to some inner clutter that I had, if you will. That's right, inner clutter. And what I discovered was that me being a perfectionist was directly linked to a need to be liked, a need to prove myself because I was never the one picked for the team. So I started to listen to what all these spiritual gurus were saying about embracing imperfection. And I started to slowly do that, and it totally worked. Slowly but surely, I started becoming a happier person. I was loosening the grip on all this kind of stuff. I would wait a day to return an email. I would go back to yoga class and purposely put my mat on a diagonal, see if I could handle it. And I could. And it was awesome. But then I had this new crisis because I had been embracing imperfection mostly in my personal life, but I had this organizing business. And there was still something in my brain that said that organization and perfectionism went together. So I totally turned my back on my business, and I just was not interested anymore. I didn't believe in it. I was like, who cares about matching containers? That's not what life is about. Life is about connecting with one another and loving ourselves. I don't want to do this anymore. And I was this close to shutting the doors of my business. I actually had a mass email to all my clients ready to go where I was like, thanks, peace. And I was just about to press send, and a voice came in my head, and it said, don't forget you still have to pay rent. Had totally forgotten. So strong beliefs. I was just like, oh, right, real life. If you ever hear that voice, maybe give it a listen. So I kept the doors open. And I was just going through the motions for kind of a couple more years. Still didn't get it. Until finally, thankfully, I had a big aha moment. I sat myself down and I said, hey, you dummy. You still like being a pretty organized person. You still love coming home at the end of the day to a clear space. You need to create from and work from a clear space. You really love having some control of your email inbox and your to-do list to know what's going on there, feel like you can handle it. So wait a second. Of course, what if this was never about what's right or wrong and simply about what makes you feel good versus what makes you feel bad? And that's it. And the decluttered life doesn't just make you feel good, it makes you feel elated and energized and ready. And clutter doesn't just make you feel bad, but it makes you feel depleted and uninspired. So once that became the new barometer, then the heavens opened up and this whole new chapter of new order was born. One that was only about feeling better. And it was coupled with the knowledge that embracing imperfection and our humanity was a non-negotiable part of the process. So that new mission looks like this. We're still trying our best. We're doing as much as we can to have this clarity, but there's room to be a human being. As much room as you need. This is my bedroom now. It's not bad. It's pretty good, right? Took me about 4 years in my new space to get it to a place that feels right for me. This is the third paint color I've been through. This photo, by the way, is from a recent house tour I did with Apartment Therapy, who are my beloved collaborators. You, of course, have the great pleasure of listening to Maxwell Ryan speak later today. Now let me show you another angle of my bedroom. Over in the corner on the right, that's my creative space. That's where I write songs. And it works for me. And again, I know this photo's pretty good. But it wouldn't be on the cover of a design magazine. If so, a stylist would come in, remove that microphone, Maybe take a couple of things off of the dresser, remove the satchel and the magazine file from under the piano, maybe make that orange scarf be displayed a little bit better, move some of the notebooks from under the computer. But I use that microphone. I use that satchel. That's where my music cables are stored. I use everything on that dresser. I don't care what that orange scarf looks like because it belonged to my late sister-in-law and it inspires my creativity. Do I want to declutter some of the books on that shelf? Of course, but I'm not going to beat myself up. There is no such thing as before and after. There is only before and better. If there's one idea I want you to walk out of here today with, it is the idea that a little better is a little better. A tiny increment of joy is still joy. So, let's get into a few practical tips. Again, you've got New Order, the book that is chock full of how-tos and step-by-steps in so many areas. Physical clutter, digital clutter, paper, emails, social media. We've got collaboration and outsourcing and to-do lists and productivity all in a tiny book. But I want today to tell you what I think are kind of the first waves in a few major categories. Now, the words decluttering and organizing are used interchangeably a lot, but they actually mean two different things. Related, of course, but one of the reasons I actually prefer more to be called a decluttering pro rather than a professional organizer is because decluttering has to happen first. If you just decluttered, you'd feel better. The organization is, of course, important, but it comes a little later. So your first order of business is less. So with digital clutter, your first wave, if you will, this is one of the illustrations from the book. Digital clutter can make us feel crazy, am I right? So there's two things I want you to do first, and these are things you can go home and do tonight. And the first is to unsubscribe like it is your job. Okay? I know you're all subscribed to newsletters that you do not need to be getting. There is an incredible app, which maybe you've heard of, called Unroll.me, and it mass unsubscribes you from all these newsletters. I recently said this at a talk, and the next day a woman tweeted at me and said she had just unsubscribed in one night from over 2,000 newsletters. 2,000. She had no idea it had gotten to that level. Now, of course, you're going to keep the things that serve you. Your Etsy success newsletter, you're going to keep that one. That feeds you. But if you bought a scarf from some company 9 months ago and they are emailing you 3 times a week, no, not cool, right? So similarly, with notifications, all this stuff you've got popping up on your phone, you're getting emails to tell you that something you already know on a site you're already on. No, we've got to turn off all these notifications. Again, notifications from your Etsy sellers app, you're going to keep those, obviously. You need to be up on the convos with your clients, with your customers. But the other ones, if you're getting a notification from your Facebook personal profile every time some dude you went to high school with comments on your cousin's anniversary photos, you gotta shut it down, right? And you might say, oh, it's just a second, you know, these things pop up and I just look at it for a second and I glance at it and I go back to what I'm doing. Each second adds up. It adds up to your life. Each second depletes you of energy that you could be putting towards something else. Each second is clutter. So those are some things with digital clutter. Now with physical clutter, perhaps your creative space needs a little retooling. What I like to tell people is to take about 10 minutes and set yourself up for the process. Could you jump in immediately? Do you already really know what to do? Sure. But if you want to make it a little easier on yourself, if you're having trouble starting, Welcome to sorting bins. Now, I'm certainly not the only decluttering pro who talks about these, but I'm a huge, huge fan. They're simply bins or boxes or bags, stuff you've already got around the house that you can label and have a place to throw things into. So these are the 5 major categories that I love to work with. Donate, of course, very self-explanatory. Very full, yes. Trash, recycle, shred for anything sensitive. And this category that's my favorite called other rooms. Now, other rooms is going to prevent the following scenario. You are decluttering your studio space and going through your creative tools and oh, here's some sunglasses. Here's a book that belongs in the living room. So you walk out to the living room and then you're in the living room and oh my goodness, what a mess here. Let me start decluttering the living room. Oh, wait a second, the phone's ringing. Let me answer that. Okay, cool, right. Okay, I'm off the phone. Now I'm just gonna check Instagram for a second. Just give me a second and then it's 40 minutes later. And then you look at your watch, it's 3 o'clock. Wait, was I decluttering my studio space? Oh yeah. No, right? So the other rooms bin is to prevent this scenario. You are gonna put those sunglasses, that book in that other rooms bin, deliver them later. You're gonna stay where you are. Cool? So, after you have less, the decluttering part, then the organization part is simply about access, right? Access to what you need immediately. Access to your supplies. Access to the phone number of that guy you met who said he could introduce you to the woman who runs the craft fair that could feature you on the blog. You want to be able to pull that up immediately. That's what organization is. And when we're talking about physical clutter, pretty containers are not necessary. Now look, I love a pretty container and a label maker as much as I know you guys do. But they're not required. Cardboard boxes, Sharpies, they work just fine, right? So, when we talk about access, we're not just talking about access to the things that we're already using. Of course we want to have access to those things. But we also want to create access to the things that we want to be using. In 2005, I moved into a studio apartment and I brought with me a keyboard, a full-sized keyboard, and I had a choice. I could either store that keyboard in its case, zipped up, leaning up against a wall somewhere, and every time I wanted to use it, I could unzip it and take it out and set up the keyboard stand and put it up and plug it in, which was probably a barrier for me actually using it. Or I could give it a permanent home. And I had this extra closet in my studio apartment, and I decided to do the latter. I set up this little music area, and it was always there, ready to play. All I had to do was sit down and turn on the little power button. Now, at that point in 2005, I only wanted that piano set up for 2 reasons. To accompany myself singing show tunes, obviously, and to accompany myself singing Tori Amos songs, clearly. That's it. That's all I cared about. That's why I wanted the piano set up. Again, that was 2005. By the end of 2007, I had started to write my own songs. Nobody was more surprised by that than me. By the end of 2009, I had recorded and released my first EP. And 2 months later, at the beginning of 2010, a song that I had written in my closet was playing underneath a very dramatic scene on a television show called Grey's Anatomy. And it played for 3 minutes, and it even went over the end credits. Cool, right? Thank you. I don't say this to boast. I say this to illustrate the idea that when you literally make space for what you love, magic happens. So of course, many of you have already created this space for what you love. You've got your shops open, you're totally doing it. But if there's something you're putting off, maybe it's an added skill to your craft. Maybe that added skill has a corresponding tool. Maybe you already own it, but it's on a shelf somewhere back in the closet. It's hard to access. Get it out. Store it in front of your face. And if you're short on room, I totally understand. Just make it a little more accessible. Decluttering is a gateway drug, man. You take a hit off of decluttering, and yes, I'm going one step further with the drug metaphor. You take a hit off of decluttering, you're gonna feel ease, you're gonna feel blissed out, you're gonna feel clearer communication with your customers and more clarity with yourself. And ultimately, it's a direct path to freedom. And freedom really encompasses all this stuff we're talking about, right? When you feel truly free, you feel like anything is possible. But here's the thing about freedom. You gotta work for it. Freedom includes responsibility. Freedom ain't free, you may have heard. Strangely enough, in order to work, freedom requires things like structure and rules. Yeah. So check this out. A rule is cool. Yes, this is my dorky catchphrase that I want you to grab onto. Simple. A rule is cool. In adulthood, a rule is simply deciding the way you want your life to go and then living that. So let me give you an example of two seemingly small rules that I've made for myself in the past few years that have made a huge difference. So I have been guilty basically my entire life of throwing clothes on chairs. Anyone throw clothes on chairs, couches, beds, anything except hanging them back up? Yep, totally. So it always bummed me out. And I never did anything about it. And mind you, the chair that I was throwing these clothes on was the chair you saw in that picture of my current bedroom. It's the chair that sits at the piano. Guess who feels like practicing the piano when there are a bunch of clothes on the chair? Not me. So it was literally blocking my creativity. So I made a rule. I decided, no more, not gonna do it. And here's the thing, that's been working for me. But in order to make the rule work, I needed to bring imperfection into it. And here's what I mean. So yes, I was saying, I'm not gonna throw clothes on this chair anymore, and I'm going to actively work on the habit of hanging them back up, putting them away, etc. But there are gonna be those times when I'm a human being and I am not gonna hang them up. And in those times, I still don't want them on the chair. So I simply gave myself an alternate place to throw them. I created a bin in my closet that's different from the laundry bin. It's called an in-between basket, and it's simply where I throw clothes that I don't wanna deal with, right? And that totally works. You're allowed to give yourself these alternate places to do things with your life, right? So that was that first rule. That's been working awesome. The second was in my business. Now, as a former perfectionist and solo entrepreneur, I used to think that I was supposed to be available to my customers 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I'm sure some of you can relate to that. Guess what? I need to sleep and eat and stuff and rest. So I made a new rule. A couple of years ago, I said, I will not respond to non-time sensitive communication outside of normal business hours anymore. That's it. No, I'm sorry, client, you cannot text me at 8 p.m. and get a response. So that required doing a few things. I, of course, notified my clients. I started to put it in my service agreement for new clients, which might be the equivalent of your shop page. And then I also had to account for imperfection. So even though I was trying on nights and weekends my best to be more rested, have more relaxation, of course there were going to be those times when at 10 p.m. I needed to catch up on emails. So thankfully in 2016, we live in a time where there are apps that can schedule your emails for you. So what I did was, even if I'm writing an email at 10 p.m., it doesn't get into my client's inbox until 9 a.m. the next day, so that they know that I'm still not available outside of normal business hours. So again, these are rules that I had to consciously put into place, and they make me feel free. So we're gonna do a little interactive stuff right now, if you'll indulge. Take out a pen and paper. You're welcome to use your cell phones if you would like. And I'd like you to jot down 2 new rules for yourself. Some habits you've been wanting to change, something in your gut you know you just want to make a rule about. And if you can't think of a rule, totally fine. It can be anything, like a decluttering project, those shelves in your studio space that you know you just got to get to. Anything at all. And after you do that, I am going to have you pair up and share with each other, so be aware of that. So take about 30 seconds here and just jot some things down if you would. I hope that felt good, just to say some of that stuff out loud. Just the verbalization sometimes can help us get so much further along in the process. And feel free to share this stuff with me. Honestly, I love reading what people are up to. Feel free to send me a tweet, post a photo of a project before or better on Instagram, tag me. I would love to know. So, you might be saying, okay, sure, I get it, okay, you do it this way, we're gonna do the imperfection thing, we're gonna embrace our humanity, maybe do it a little bit at a time, take small steps. Okay, I see what's going on here. But how long is this gonna take? How long till I declutter everything? Like, how long does that usually take? How long is it gonna take? The rest of your life. In the best way possible. In a way that allows you to release the overwhelm. This is not a mountain. This is a path straight ahead. Decluttering is a practice. There's no end to yoga. There's no end to meditation. There's no end to this stuff. It's kind of like asking, how much time should I put into being happy? As much as you can spare. Forever. Even if you got rid of everything you own, you'd still have a couple of emails to return, a couple of things to throw on the to-do list, some dishes in the sink. You're allowed to feel better. We're allowed to feel better. When we do this work, that's what happens. And when we feel better, this other work that we do, this art that we create and share with the world, well, that stuff just soars. Thank you.
Hi. I love the idea of decluttering, and I've actually been working on it at home. My question is, how do you get your husband on board?
Oh, Lord.
And the kids, both.
I want to know the answer to that as well.
Yeah.
That's a tough one. I get asked this a lot, as you might imagine, and there are a couple ways to go about it. The first thing I usually recommend is to lead by example. I have often had one person in a couple call me to help, and they've got a list of things to do, even, and their partner is totally not on board. And so I usually say, just start with doing what you can. I have more than a few times seen the partner come on board after they feel the difference, sometimes even energetically, when the first person starts getting some things done. I would also recommend, not that you're doing this, not nagging. Nagging works about 0% of the time. And the third thing, which actually a colleague of mine recommended, Leslie Haber, she was saying recently that what she recommends for couples, for the person who wants to do it, is to experiment with seeing where your actual line might be, because it might be farther than you think it is, if that makes sense. See if you can experiment with maybe not cleaning up after them sometimes and seeing if you can handle it, and coming to a new place, a new compromise with your partner about what you can both live with, if that makes sense.
Hi, my name is Ainur. My shop name is Mama's Teddy Bear. My question is about ongoing projects. How would you suggest dealing with them? Like, I start something and then I get inspired to start something new, and then another project and another project.
Yeah.
And if I don't see all of them in front of me, I can't work, or I'll forget about the older ones and why they inspired me. So they all have to be in front of me. And both tables that I have, the table in the studio and in the kitchen area, they're all cluttered. And we have very little space for eating. So how would you suggest dealing with that?
Sure, you gotta eat. So the first thing I would say is, if there's a project that you're looking back at and you forget why it inspired you, you can probably let it go and put it away, maybe forever. The second thing is, I would be very curious to know what sort of task management system you're using, and if there's something, whether it's digital or tactile, that you are able to look at all the time, because I'd rather see you looking at words that remind you of the projects than having the visual reminders, which turns into clutter. So I could totally, get into some of that. There are amazing apps out there. They are listed in chapter 6. But, Evernote or reminders on your iPhone, any kind of project management system. It can also be pen and paper, so that you're constantly checking in with it and seeing what you've got, and then making choices and scheduling your days, to that. But again, I understand what it's like to pop over to different projects, and if it's not inspiring you in the present, and it's not tied to any collaboration you have accountability for, let it go.
Thanks, Faye. We actually have a question coming in from Andrea on Twitter. She asks, how long does it take you to get a routine with new rules and a new habit?
Yes.
How long does it take?
I've heard 30 days, and then I've heard new reports that it's longer. Here's the thing. I don't like to always think in numbers like that, like, oh, I have to do this for 30 days and then it's gonna work. Just start doing it, right? Yes, you wanna do something every day if you can. I think sometimes if you think in those terms and then you skip a day, you can tend to feel like you failed. And there used to be this app, there are probably similar ones where you have to keep the chain up or something. And I used it, and then when I broke the link, I was like, well, I can't do it anymore. But that's not true, right? So I'm sort of going off on a tangent here, but I think the important thing is just to say, here's what I want to do in my life. It's like the rule, and then just start doing it. And the daily scheduling of it helps. But forget about how long it's going to take and just start doing it, you know?
So the key is to just begin, not worry about how long
Exactly.
it might take to catch on.
Yes.
Hi, Stephanie Payan, shop name, same as my name. Quick question. So I know a lot of us, like personally for me, I have a hard time balancing work and my social life. And I work like 1,000 hours a week, it feels like. So do you find it's helpful like to schedule in time without seeming like desensitive, but like schedule in time with friends and family or significant others and try to balance it so we're not going crazy? Or do you have like a secret?
Absolutely. Well, you know, the second rule that I shared with you was part of that, where I now feel free to do fun things, you know, during the nighttime. I know a lot of us have different schedules, so that can't always be the case. But even when that's not the case, the other thing that I did is I decided about 3 years ago, about the same time, that I would no longer work with clients on Sundays. That was my thing. So perhaps it's you no longer work, you know, you no longer do studio work on one day or something. And I find it has to be the same day every week. And what that allows me to feel like is that even if I'm in one of those crazy 80-hour weeks, that there is always a light at the end of the tunnel. I always know that I never would have scheduled something like that for Sunday. Once in a blue moon, that rule can be broken, but so that's my little light. And if you can't, you know, quote unquote, afford a whole day, then maybe it's Wednesday mornings or something like that. So making it the same time every week, I think, is what's most helpful for that.
Hi, my name is Angie, and my shop is Sassy Sash Sashes. And yes, I have one on today. And thank you so much, A, for the generosity of the book. I'm excited to dive in. I'm definitely a self-proclaimed clutterer, and definitely find that to be debilitating sometimes. So my question is, when do you recommend to seek more professional help and not take it on your own? And then maybe a price range of like what that would look like to have services.
Sure. So I'm so into outsourcing and collaboration and helping yourself out. I think hiring an organizer is one of those things that obviously people are afraid of. It's so intimate and so vulnerable. Do it if you can do it. The price range, organizers, depending on where you live, if you live in New York City, it's gonna cost you a lot. But they charge rates similar to therapists. So that is a similar hourly rate. And I know that that is high, but it is therapy. And you might, you know, look, TaskRabbit is great. There are a lot of very talented people on TaskRabbit who have great organizational skills. So you can also go that route for perhaps a little less.
Hi, my name is Kat. I'm the owner of Treasures from the UK on Etsy. And my question for you has to do with your suggestion of setting up business hours. Do you think it's practical for an Etsy owner to do that because we are a worldwide marketplace?
Great question. Certainly you guys know more about that than I do, but I would say that I truly feel that we all need our own set of personal boundaries. And again, time-sensitive stuff, anything goes, right? So, you know, depending on your shop and what you get, maybe you get more time-sensitive inquiries than not. But I do truly think that it doesn't have to be 9 to 5. When I say business hours, it's business hours that you create. You know, if that's 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., great. But it's you setting up some boundary for yourself that makes sense for you. Because I just find that the anything goes model just makes me never feel like I can be free. So you can mold as you need to.
And speaking to that, Fay, to that exact thing, you know, as a buyer, as a self-proclaimed buyer on Etsy, speaking to a room of sellers, have you ever had an experience where, you know, you have run into a seller who was setting those boundaries, maybe because they were in a different time zone or something like that, you know, My thought is that you're a lovely, wonderful person, so that probably doesn't bother you. Like, I think that my belief is that there's a feeling of mutual respect between buyers and sellers. And so I'd love to hear what you think about that.
I think I've turned into such a laid back, like, I'm so glad when I see a solo entrepreneur not get back to me right away. I'm like, you take your time, you know? Yeah. Like, I feel it. But I know that we live in a world where people are expecting you to email them back immediately, even if you haven't heard from them in like 6 months. So I get that might be the feeling. Again, you can make these policies known on your shop pages. And there was something else I was going to say that I forget. But yeah, it's like, again, if it's, here's what I was going to say. I was going to use the example of, any other shop you would buy something from online, or a doctor's office, or anywhere where you go and patronize as a customer. They clearly have their business hours, right? You don't expect to get a call from your dentist at 7:30. So see what it's like, make experiments, see what feels right for you. Again, I know that it is different for you guys, but just take a chance, and what's the worst that could happen? Then you go back.
So you're not recommending staying awake 24 hours a day trying to run your shop?
I would not stay awake 24 hours a day. No. Yeah. Yeah.
We've got some great questions coming in from our live streaming audience. Megan on Twitter would like to ask you, Fay, what is one small thing you do to start each day?
Ooh, good.
I like this one.
I stretch my body, and it has been, now the habit is in me, because now I can't leave the house because I have an 80-year-old back, and I can't leave the house without doing it. So that's probably the one thing I need to do every morning. Yeah. And I also try to play music for at least 10 minutes.
10 minutes?
Yeah.
Speak to that. I want to know, just 10 minutes.
Yeah, just
That's
10
wonderful.
minutes, because there's so much you can get done in 10 minutes. When I was writing my book, actually, it was one of the first times in my life that the only place I had to be was at my computer and not at an appointment somewhere. So while I was writing my book, I started to put my money where my mouth was with stuff that I was putting into the book, and started this daily habit of writing songs for 10 minutes every morning, because I knew that I didn't have that much more time, and more time than that felt overwhelming. So just 10 minutes was great, and of course I usually spent more time on that. So that's a part of the whole a little better is a little better thing.
I love that, because even by the end of a week, you've spent 70 minutes on something without even really thinking about it.
Right.
I'm going to start doing
that, guys. A lot of new
songs
songs were written while the book was written, yeah.
I've got one more question from our live streaming audience. Julie on Twitter asked, do you have a process for how to declutter your mind? Or what worked for you when you went through that process? People are asking great questions, by the way.
They really are. I'm a spiritual person. I won't get too into that, because I know we all believe in different things. But one of the things that helps me is to meditate, to practice yoga sometimes, to read books by people like Eckhart Tolle and Pema Chodron, and to practice self-love. And I think that's probably one of the most important things to help me declutter my mind.
Excellent. And that can take so many different forms depending on what your beliefs are.
Yeah.
So I am currently in civil engineering, trying to get out and do what I really love to do. I personally have a problem with delegating. So when you're with a firm with lots of people that you can delegate to versus being on your own, doing what you truly love, how do you delegate? And if so, how and to whom, and budgets and all that sort of thing?
Totally. Well, I am definitely a small business owner, and what's in the budget for me is a very, very part-time personal assistant, which has completely changed my life. I've had her working with me for about 2.5 years. And practice. It was practice. There are things that I trust her with now that I did not at the beginning. Things she just knows. She was so incredible for the book writing process. And I could never go back. There are certain things like, writing my newsletter in my voice and posting on social media that I'm not yet or ever going to be ready to let go of, unless some, incredibly quirky, funnier than me millennial shows up at my door. Please, who only wants just to hang out and eat snacks.
Again with the snacks.
Yeah, man, they're so good. But yeah, honestly, practice. And as far as budgets, that's, of course, a personal issue. But I will just say, without saying numbers, that I pay her well and very little, and a very small amount of hours, if that makes sense. She's only guaranteed 4 hours a week, and she's changed my life. So, yeah, not bad, right?